The email arrived on a Tuesday morning, buried between vendor invoices and project updates in my work inbox. The subject line was innocuous enough. Application for senior marketing manager position, David Thompson. It was the last name that made me pause mid-sip of my coffee. Thompson. My maiden name. The name I'd legally changed back to after my divorce 3 years ago. I clicked open the application and there it was, a professional headshot of my younger brother David, smiling confidently at the camera in what looked like an expensive suit. His resume was impressive. MBA from Wharton, 5 years at Goldman Sachs, 2 years at a Fortune 500 consulting firm. All made possible by the $200,000 our parents had given him for education, living expenses, and, quote, networking opportunities. The same parents who had told me they couldn't help with my college tuition because they needed to, quote, save for David's future. I leaned back in my chair, looking out the window of my corner office at the Seattle skyline. It had taken me 15 years to build this company from a one-person freelance operation into a marketing firm with 47 employees and 8-figure annual revenue. 15 years of 60-hour weeks, ramen dinners, and bootstrap financing while David sailed through business school on our parents' dime. Sarah? My assistant knocked on the open door. The hiring committee is ready for you in conference room B. Give me 5 minutes, please. I needed to compose myself before reviewing applicants for the senior marketing manager position. We'd received over 200 applications for the role, and the hiring committee had narrowed it down to 12 candidates for final consideration. Apparently, one of those 12 was my brother. David and I hadn't spoken in 2 years, not since the blow-up at our father's 70th birthday party. He'd made some comment about how lucky I was to have found my niche in small business marketing, while he was working on real deals that moved markets. I'd finally told him exactly what I thought about his attitude and our parents' favoritism, and he'd responded by calling me bitter and jealous. Our mother had spent the rest of the evening telling me I should be supportive of David's success and stop holding grudges about decisions they'd made when we were younger. The irony wasn't lost on me. David was applying for a job at the company he'd once dismissed as a quote-quote niche operation. I walked into the conference room where our hiring committee was assembled. Marcus, my head of operations, Jennifer, our creative director, and Tom, our senior account manager. They'd been working together for 3 years and had excellent judgment about cultural fit and professional capabilities. All right, I said, settling into my chair. Let's review the final candidates. Marcus opened his laptop and pulled up the first resume. We've got some really strong applicants this round. The market conditions have brought some high-caliber people into consideration. We worked through 11 candidates, discussing qualifications, interview performance, and potential fit with our team culture. Everyone was thorough and thoughtful in their evaluations. Finally, Marcus clicked to the last application. This one's interesting, he said. David Thompson, MBA from Wharton, impressive experience in financial services and consulting. His interview was polished, and his portfolio shows some sophisticated strategic thinking. What did you think of his personality fit? I asked Jennifer. He was very confident, maybe a little intense. He seemed to have strong opinions about how we should be approaching client strategy. Meaning? He suggested that we were probably undervaluing our services and missing opportunities for upselling existing clients. Not wrong necessarily, but it felt presumptuous for someone interviewing for a position. Tom nodded. I got similar vibes. Very smart, very accomplished, but he seemed to assume he knew better than our current approach without really understanding why we do things the way we do. Did he ask questions about our culture or methodology? I asked. Not really, Marcus replied. Mostly he talked about what he could bring to the role and how his experience at larger organizations could help us scale up our operations. I was getting a familiar picture of David. Brilliant, ambitious, and completely convinced that his way was the right way. The same attitude that had made family dinners insufferable for years. What about his specific qualifications for this role? I asked. On paper, he's overqualified, Jennifer admitted. His strategic planning experience is excellent, and his analytical skills are probably stronger than anyone else we interviewed. But I sensed hesitation. But he's never worked at a company smaller than 1,000 employees, Tom said. I'm not sure he understands how different it is to work somewhere like this, where everyone wears multiple hats and you have to build relationships rather than just execute strategies. Also, Marcus added, he seemed surprised by some of our benefits and policies. Like he couldn't understand why we offer unlimited PTO or why we don't track billable hours for salaried employees. What did he say about that? He asked how we maintain accountability without strict performance metrics. When I explained our approach to trust-based management, he looked skeptical. The committee spent another 20 minutes discussing David's application alongside the other candidates. By the end of the conversation, it was clear that while David was technically qualified, he wasn't the best fit for our company culture. I think we're looking at 3 strong finalists, Jennifer concluded. Sandra Martinez has the right blend of strategic thinking and collaborative approach. James Chen has excellent client relationship experience and really understands our industry. And Patricia Williams has the creative background that could help us expand our service offerings. David Thompson doesn't make your final 3, I asked. He's 4th, Marcus said diplomatically. Great credentials, but we're not sure he'd thrive here. I found myself in an interesting position. The hiring committee had reached their conclusion without knowing about my relationship to David. Their assessment aligned with my personal knowledge of his personality and work style, but I still needed to decide how to handle the situation. Before we make final decisions, I said, I need to disclose something. David Thompson is my brother. The silence that followed was brief but profound. Your brother? Jennifer asked. The one who our parents paid for business school while I took out loans for community college, yes. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Sarah, we had no idea. Does that change how we should evaluate his application? It shouldn't, I replied. But I want you all to know so you can factor that into your decision-making process. How do you want to handle this? Tom asked. It could be awkward to have family working here. It could be, but it could also be an opportunity to rebuild our relationship in a professional context. Jennifer leaned forward. What's your honest assessment of how he'd fit with our team? I considered the question carefully. Based on his interview and your feedback, I think your evaluations are probably accurate. David is brilliant and hardworking, but he's used to environments where hierarchy and competition drive performance. Our culture is based on collaboration and trust. Do you think he could adapt? Marcus asked. I don't know, he's never had to. Every organization he's worked for has reinforced his existing approach to business and relationships. The discussion continued for another hour, covering the implications of hiring family members, the potential benefits and risks, and how to ensure fairness in the evaluation process. Here's what I think we should do, I finally said. Proceed with your original assessment. If David isn't one of your top 3 candidates based on fit and qualifications, then we don't offer him the position. If family relationship was going to be the deciding factor, it should favor the other candidates, not him. Are you sure about that? Tom asked. This could be a chance to help him and maybe improve your relationship. Helping him by giving him a job he's not suited for wouldn't actually help him, and improving our relationship can't be built on professional favoritism. What if he asks why he wasn't selected? Jennifer wondered. Then we tell him the truth. He's overqualified on paper but not the right cultural fit for our organization. The committee voted unanimously to proceed with Sandra Martinez as their first choice, with James Chen and Patricia Williams as alternates. David didn't make the final cut. I spent the rest of the day thinking about how to handle the conversation with David. We hadn't spoken since the birthday party incident, and I wasn't sure he even knew I owned the company he'd applied to. His application had been submitted through our online portal, and our company name didn't include my name. I decided to call him directly rather than leaving the rejection to our HR process. David, it's Sarah. Sarah? He sounded surprised. I wasn't expecting to hear from you. I wanted to talk to you about your application to Meridian Marketing Solutions. The pause was long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. You work there? He finally asked. I own it. Another pause. You own the company I applied to? I founded it 12 years ago. We've grown pretty significantly since then. I had no idea. The application process was handled by your staff. I never saw your name associated with the company. That's intentional. I prefer to let the work speak for itself, rather than building everything around personal branding. Sarah, I need to apologize for what I said at Dad's party. I was out of line, and I've been thinking about it for 2 years. The admission caught me off guard. I'd expected defensiveness or awkwardness, not a direct apology. I appreciate that, David, but we need to talk about your application. Right. I assume this creates some kind of conflict of interest? Not exactly. My hiring committee evaluated your application without knowing you were my brother. They made their decision based purely on professional criteria. And you're not getting the job. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Can I ask why? He said finally. Because while you're overqualified on paper, the committee didn't think you'd be a good cultural fit for our organization. What does that mean? It means our company operates on principles of collaboration, trust, and relationship building. Your interview suggested you're more comfortable with hierarchy, competition, and metrics-driven management. Those aren't bad things, Sarah. They're not bad things, but they're not our things. We've built a culture that works for us and our clients. Hiring someone who would try to change that culture wouldn't be fair to them or to us. David was quiet for a moment. Is this about our family stuff? Are you still angry about Mom and Dad's decisions? David, I didn't even tell the hiring committee you were my brother until after they'd made their decision. This isn't about our family history, it's about professional fit. But you could override their decision if you wanted to. I could, but I won't. Why not? The question hung in the air while I considered how honest to be. Because giving you a job you're not suited for wouldn't help you, and it would undermine the trust my team has in my leadership. So what do I do now? The market is pretty tight for senior-level positions. You find a role that matches your skills and work style. You're talented, David. There are plenty of organizations that would value your approach. But not yours. Not currently, no. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, covering David's career situation, the job market for marketing professionals, and the possibility of maintaining better communication despite our professional paths not intersecting. Sarah, he said as we prepared to end the call, can I ask you something? Sure. Do you think I could ever work somewhere like your company? Or am I just fundamentally not suited for collaborative environments? It was a thoughtful question that suggested more self-awareness than I'd expected. I think you could adapt if you really wanted to, but it would require questioning some assumptions about how business relationships work and what drives performance. What kind of assumptions? That competition produces better results than collaboration, that hierarchy is more efficient than trust, that people need external pressure to do their best work. Those things aren't true. They're sometimes true in some environments. But they're not universally true, and they're not true here. How do you maintain quality and accountability without competitive pressure? We hire people who are intrinsically motivated to do excellent work, and we create an environment where excellence is supported rather than demanded. That sounds idealistic. It sounds idealistic if you assume people are fundamentally lazy or selfish. But if you assume people want to do meaningful work and contribute to something bigger than themselves, it's just practical. David was quiet for a long moment. I'm not sure I know how to work that way. Most people don't, initially. It's a different skill set than what business schools teach. Would you be willing to, give me some advice about how to develop those skills? The request surprised me. The David I'd grown up with never asked for advice, especially not from his older sister, who'd taken the easier path of small business ownership. I'd be happy to help you think through it, but David, it has to be because you genuinely want to change your approach, not because you think it'll get you a job here. I understand. And Sarah? Yeah. I'm sorry it took me this long to realize how impressive what you've built is. I was wrong about a lot of things. After we hung up, I sat in my office thinking about the conversation and what it meant for our relationship going forward. The David who had applied for the job was the same David I'd grown up with. Brilliant, driven, and convinced that his approach was naturally superior. But the David who had apologized and asked for advice seemed to be questioning those assumptions. The next morning, I called Sandra Martinez to offer her the senior marketing manager position. She accepted enthusiastically and would start in 2 weeks. I also sent a note to the rest of the hiring committee, thanking them for their thorough evaluation process and confirming that we'd made the right decision. A few days later, I received an email from David. "Sarah, I've been thinking about our conversation, and I'd like to take you up on your offer to discuss different approaches to business relationships. I've also been doing some research on collaborative management styles and trust-based organizations. Would you be willing to meet for coffee sometime soon? I'd like to understand how you built the culture at your company, and whether there are ways I could develop skills in that direction. Also, I owe you a proper apology for years of dismissive comments about your work. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." I stared at the email for several minutes. This level of humility and genuine curiosity was completely unlike the David I'd known for 32 years. I wrote back, "Coffee sounds good. There's a place called Grind Coffee on 5th Street. Saturday at 10 a.m., work for you?" Saturday morning found me sitting across from David in a small cafe, watching him fidget with his coffee cup, while we made awkward small talk about the weather and Seattle traffic. Finally, I decided to address the elephant in the room. "This is weird for both of us," I said. "We haven't had a civil conversation in years, and now we're trying to have a professional development discussion." David laughed nervously. "Yeah, it's definitely strange, but I meant what I said about wanting to understand how you approach business differently. What specifically do you want to know?" "Start with the basics. How do you motivate people without competition or strict performance metrics?" "By hiring people who are intrinsically motivated and then removing obstacles to their success rather than creating pressure for performance." "But how do you ensure they actually perform?" "The same way you ensure anything important happens, by making it possible, probable, and personally meaningful." David pulled out a notebook and started taking notes. "Explain that." "Make it possible by providing resources, training, and support. Make it probable by creating systems and processes that lead naturally to good outcomes. Make it personally meaningful by connecting individual work to larger purposes that matter to them." That sounds like it would take a lot of time and effort to implement. It does. But once it's implemented, it requires much less ongoing management than command and control approaches. How so? Because people manage themselves when they understand the purpose, have the tools they need, and trust that their efforts will be recognized and supported. David scribbled more notes. "What about people who don't respond to that approach?" "They usually don't last long, but not because we fire them. They tend to self-select out because they're more comfortable in environments with external structure and competition." "Is that what you think would happen to me?" "I honestly don't know. You've never worked in an environment like that, so we don't have data about how you'd adapt." "What would adaptation look like?" I thought about the question carefully. It would mean shifting from seeing colleagues as competitors to seeing them as collaborators. It would mean measuring success by team outcomes rather than individual achievements. It would mean asking, "How can I help?" more often than "How can I win?" Those are pretty fundamental changes. They are, but they're not personality changes, they're skill changes. What's the difference? Personality is relatively fixed. Skills can be developed through practice and feedback. David closed his notebook and looked directly at me. "Sarah, can I ask you about something else?" "Sure. Do you think I'm capable of developing those skills based on what you know about me as a person?" It was a vulnerable question that required a careful answer. I think you're capable of learning anything you decide you want to learn, but I also think it would require admitting that some of your previous approaches weren't optimal, and I'm not sure you're ready for that level of self-examination. What do you mean? Your success so far has come from being smarter and more driven than other people. Collaborative approaches require accepting that other people might have insights, perspectives, or capabilities that you don't have. That's harder than it sounds. It is, especially for people who've been rewarded for individual excellence their entire lives. The conversation continued for 2 hours, covering topics ranging from leadership philosophy to team dynamics to the role of trust in organizational culture. David asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in understanding rather than debating. "I have one more question," he said as we prepared to leave. "What's that?" "If I genuinely developed these skills and changed my approach to work relationships, would you consider hiring me in the future?" "David, I can't promise you a job, but I can promise that any future applications would be evaluated fairly based on your qualifications and fit at that time. That's fair. But can I ask you something now? Of course. Why is this important to you? You could probably find another high-paying position at a traditional organization where your current skills would be valued. David was quiet for a long moment. Because I'm starting to realize that being the smartest person in the room isn't as satisfying as I thought it would be. And because I want to build something meaningful rather than just executing other people's strategies. Those are good reasons. Also because I want to have a better relationship with my sister, and it's hard to do that when I don't respect the work she does. The admission was unexpected and more honest than I'd anticipated. David, you don't have to change your entire career approach to have a better relationship with me. Maybe not. But I think I need to change my career approach for my own reasons, and having a better relationship with you would be a nice side benefit. We left the cafe with an agreement to continue our conversations and to maintain better communication going forward. I wasn't sure whether David would follow through on his interest in developing collaborative skills, but I was impressed by his willingness to question assumptions he'd held for years. 3 months later, I received another email from David. Sarah, I wanted to update you on some developments. I've been working with an executive coach who specializes in collaborative leadership, and I've taken a position with a small consulting firm that emphasizes team-based approaches to client work. The adjustment has been challenging, but I'm learning a lot about how different leadership styles produce different outcomes. I'm also volunteering with a nonprofit organization that focuses on collaborative problem-solving for community development projects. It's been eye-opening to work on projects where success is measured by collective impact rather than individual achievement. I'd love to continue our conversations when you have time. I called him that evening. How's the new position working out? I asked. It's harder than I expected, but more interesting than I anticipated. Harder how? I keep catching myself trying to take charge of situations where I should be facilitating collaboration. And I'm discovering that some of my ideas aren't as brilliant as I thought they were when other people have the opportunity to build on them or challenge them. That sounds like progress. It feels like progress, slow progress, but definitely movement in the right direction. What's been the most surprising thing? How much more creative the solutions are when you get multiple perspectives involved from the beginning rather than just asking for feedback on ideas I've already developed. And how's the nonprofit work? Amazing. We're working on affordable housing initiatives, and the complexity of balancing community needs, economic constraints, and political realities requires exactly the kind of collaborative problem-solving you were talking about. The conversation continued for an hour, with David describing specific examples of how his approach to work relationships was evolving and what he was learning about team dynamics and trust building. Sarah, he said as we prepared to end the call, I owe you an apology that goes beyond what I said about your work. For what? For years of assuming that Mom and Dad's favoritism was justified because I was somehow more deserving of support than you were. The topic we'd both avoided for decades was finally being addressed directly. David, that wasn't your fault. You were a kid, and you received the opportunities that were offered to you. But I was an adult when I continued to act like their support was something I'd earned rather than something I'd been given. What made you realize that? Working with people who've had to build everything from nothing, I'm starting to understand how much harder it is to succeed without financial support and family connections. It's different, but it's not necessarily harder. Just different challenges and different skill development. Sarah, you built a successful company while carrying student loans and working multiple jobs. I had every advantage and barely managed to maintain employment at organizations that recruited me. There's no comparison. There's no need for comparison, David. We had different circumstances and made different choices. I want to make better choices going forward. Then make them. The past doesn't determine the future unless you let it. 6 months after that conversation, David called with news that surprised me. Sarah, I've been offered a partnership track position at my consulting firm, but I'm thinking about turning it down. Why? Because I want to start something of my own. something focused on helping organizations transition to more collaborative and trust-based cultures. That's a big change from financial services and traditional consulting. It is, but it's what I'm passionate about now. The question is whether I'm ready to take the entrepreneurial risk. What kind of risk are you talking about? Financial uncertainty, building a client base from scratch, competing with established firms that have more resources and brand recognition. Those are real challenges. Do you have a plan for addressing them? I have some ideas, but I'd love to get your perspective on what it's really like to build a business from nothing. The request represented a complete reversal of our historical relationship. David was asking for my expertise in an area where I had more experience and knowledge than he did. I'd be happy to share what I've learned about entrepreneurship. But David, starting a business requires a different skill set than working for someone else. Are you sure you're ready for that transition? I'm not sure about anything except that I want to try. Even if I fail, I think I'll learn more from the attempt than I would from staying in a safe position. We spent the next several hours discussing business planning, market research, financial projections, and the psychological challenges of entrepreneurship. David took detailed notes and asked thoughtful questions about everything from client acquisition to cash flow management. One more question, he said. Would you be willing to serve as an informal advisor as I develop this business concept? I'd be honored to help. And Sarah, thank you for being patient with me while I figured out how much I had to learn. A year later, David's consulting practice was growing steadily, focused on helping traditional organizations implement collaborative management approaches. His first major client was a manufacturing company that wanted to transition from hierarchical to team-based production systems. The irony, he told me during one of our monthly advisory conversations, is that everything I learned about competitive strategy and financial analysis is useful, but only when it's applied in service of collaborative goals. Your traditional business training wasn't worthless, it just needed to be integrated with different values and objectives. Exactly. I'm using the same analytical skills, but for different purposes. How's it feeling professionally? Like I'm finally doing work that matches who I want to be rather than just who I happen to be good at being. That's a pretty significant evolution. It is. And Sarah? Yeah? I think I'm ready to apply for a job at your company again. The comment was clearly a joke, but it prompted a serious conversation about our professional and personal relationship. Actually, I said, I've been thinking about expanding our services to include organizational culture consulting. Would you be interested in exploring a partnership rather than an employment relationship? A partnership between our companies? A collaboration where your expertise in culture transformation complements our marketing and communications capabilities. That's actually a brilliant idea. There's a lot of overlap between effective internal culture and effective external communication. And there's a market for integrated services that address both organizational development and market positioning. The partnership discussion continued over several months, covering everything from service integration to revenue sharing to client relationship management. By the end of the process, we developed a framework for collaboration that leveraged both of our company's strengths while maintaining our independence. You know what's funny? David said during our partnership signing meeting. What? If our parents had given us equal support, we might never have developed such different but complementary skill sets. How do you figure? If I'd had to struggle more, I might have developed more resilience and creativity. If you'd had more support, you might have taken fewer risks and learned less about bootstrap problem solving. So you're saying their favoritism accidentally produced a better outcome? I'm saying that unfair circumstances sometimes lead to unexpected capabilities, and maybe the best response is to find ways to use those capabilities collaboratively rather than competitively. That's a surprisingly mature perspective. I've had good teachers. The partnership launched 6 months later with a client who needed both organizational culture development and rebranding services. The project required exactly the kind of collaborative approach that David had been learning and that my company had been practicing for years. This is working better than I expected, I told David after our third successful joint project. Why is it working so well? Because we've both learned to value what the other person brings rather than competing for who's more important. Plus, we're both independently successful, so we're collaborating from positions of strength rather than need. That helps too. 2 years after our partnership began, we were invited to speak at a conference about sibling business relationships and how family dynamics can evolve in professional contexts. The most important lesson, I told the audience, is that family relationships don't have to be determined by childhood patterns or parental decisions. Adult siblings can choose to build new relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. But, David added, that requires both people being willing to examine their assumptions and change their behavior. You can't unilaterally transform a relationship. What advice would you give to siblings who are struggling with professional jealousy or competition? An audience member asked. Focus on developing your own capabilities rather than comparing your success to your sibling's success, I replied. Comparison is only useful if it motivates improvement, not if it creates resentment. Also, David said, consider that your sibling's success doesn't diminish your own. There's usually room for multiple people to succeed, especially if you're pursuing different approaches or serving different markets. What about family favoritism? How do you deal with parents who clearly prefer one child over another? David and I looked at each other before I answered. Family favoritism is painful and unfair, but it doesn't have to define your adult relationships with your siblings, I said. The sibling who received favoritism can acknowledge that advantage and work to level the playing field. The sibling who was disadvantaged can focus on building their own success, rather than waiting for family dynamics to change. Most importantly, David added, you can build an adult relationship that's based on who you are now rather than who your parents thought you were 20 years ago. After the conference, we were driving back to Seattle when David brought up a topic we'd never directly discussed. Sarah, do you think our parents realize how their favoritism affected our relationship? I don't think they see it as favoritism. I think they see it as providing different support for different needs. Do you think they understand the impact? Probably not. And honestly, I'm not sure it matters anymore. What do you mean? I mean we've built a good relationship despite their mistakes, not because they corrected them. Waiting for them to understand or apologize would have prevented us from moving forward. Do you think we should talk to them about it? Do you want to? David was quiet for several miles. I think I want them to understand what we've learned about collaboration and mutual support. Not to make them feel bad, but to help them see what's possible when people treat each other as equals. That sounds like a conversation worth having. 3 months later, we invited our parents to visit our companies and see our partnership in action. They spent a day observing client meetings, team interactions, and strategic planning sessions. I had no idea your businesses were so sophisticated, our mother said at dinner that evening. What did you expect? I asked. I don't know. Something smaller, I guess. Both companies are successful because they're built on collaboration and mutual respect, David said. The same principles that have made our partnership work. Partnership? Our father asked. Sarah and I have been working together for 2 years now. Her marketing expertise and my organizational development background complement each other perfectly. You're working together after all those years of arguing? We learned to value what each other brings rather than competing for who's better, I explained. The conversation continued for several hours, covering our business development, our approach to collaboration, and what we'd learned about building successful relationships. I think we may have made some mistakes when you were growing up, our mother said finally. What kind of mistakes? David asked. We probably should have supported both of you equally instead of assuming that one of you needed more help than the other. Why did you assume that? I asked. David seemed to have clearer goals and more concrete plans. Your interests were more scattered, and we weren't sure how to support them. So you decided not to support them at all? We decided to focus our resources where we thought they would have the most impact. David and I exchanged glances. Our parents still didn't fully understand the impact of their decisions, but they were acknowledging that their approach had been flawed. The important thing, I said, is that we all learned from the experience and built something better. What did you learn? Our father asked. That fairness isn't about equal treatment, David replied. It's about equal respect and equal belief in each other's potential. And that success isn't a competition between family members, I added. It's an opportunity to support each other's growth and achievement. Our parents left Seattle with a better understanding of what we'd built, both professionally and personally. The conversation didn't resolve decades of family dynamics, but it opened the possibility for different kinds of relationships going forward. 5 years after David first applied for a job at my company, we were celebrating the success of our partnership with a joint company retreat. Employees from both organizations were working together on team-building exercises and strategic planning sessions. You know what's remarkable about this? Jennifer, my creative director, observed as we watched the groups collaborate. What's that? 5 years ago, you rejected David's application because he wasn't a good cultural fit. Now our companies work together so seamlessly that it's hard to tell who works for whom. People can change when they're motivated to change, I replied. What motivated David to change? The same thing that motivates most people to change, realizing that their current approach wasn't producing the results they actually wanted. And what results did he actually want? Meaningful work, genuine relationships, and the satisfaction of building something that matters. David walked over to join our conversation. Are you talking about me? We're talking about how much you've changed since your first interview here, Jennifer said. I haven't changed that much. I've just learned to apply my capabilities in service of different values. What's the difference? I asked. Change implies becoming someone different. Learning implies becoming a better version of who you already are. That's a good distinction. Plus, David added with a grin, I finally have a job working with you, just not the way either of us expected. I looked around at the retreat activities, watching employees from both companies collaborate on projects that leveraged our combined expertise. You're right, I said. This is much better than if I'd just hired you 5 years ago. How so? Because we built a relationship based on mutual respect and shared goals, rather than family obligation or professional convenience. And because we each developed the skills and perspectives we needed to make collaboration successful. Most importantly, Jennifer added, because you both learned that family relationships can evolve when people are willing to do the work to make them better. David and I looked at each other and smiled. We'd traveled a long way from the resentment and competition that had defined our relationship for decades. Our parents had given everything to David, and I'd spent years believing that meant they'd given nothing to me. But in the end, their favoritism had accidentally given us both something valuable, the motivation to become people who could build something better together than either of us could have created alone. David had applied for a job at my company as someone I couldn't hire. He'd become someone I couldn't imagine working without. And that transformation had made all the difference. 7 years after David's first application, our partnership had evolved into something neither of us had anticipated. What began as a collaboration between two separate companies had grown into an integrated consulting firm that specialized in organizational transformation and strategic communication. We'd acquired 2 smaller firms, hired 36 additional employees, and established offices in 3 cities. The Morrison Industries project is our biggest challenge yet, David said during our weekly strategy meeting. They want to transform a 100-year-old manufacturing company from top-down hierarchical management to collaborative team-based operations. What's the timeline? I asked, reviewing the preliminary assessment. 18 months for full implementation across 4 facilities, 1,500 employees total. That's ambitious. What makes you think it's achievable? Because Morrison's CEO, Janet Morrison, reminds me of someone I know who built a successful company based on collaborative principles. I looked up from the project documents. Meaning? Meaning she's committed to the values, not just the business outcomes. She understands that culture change requires authentic leadership, not just new policies and procedures. Have you met with their executive team? Last week, interesting dynamics. Half of them are excited about the transformation. The other half are terrified that collaborative management means losing control and accountability. That's pretty typical for organizations trying to shift from command and control to trust-based management. Right. But Morrison has an additional complication. Which is, it's a family business. Janet Morrison is the founder's daughter, and she's trying to implement changes that her father's generation of leadership thinks will destroy the company. I set down the documents and looked at David directly. So we're dealing with family business dynamics on top of organizational culture change. Exactly. And that's why I think we're uniquely qualified to help them. Because we've navigated family business relationships ourselves. Because we've learned how to separate personal history from professional collaboration. Morrison Industries needs leadership that understands both the technical aspects of culture change and the emotional aspects of family dynamics. The Morrison project would become our largest and most complex engagement, but it was also the one that defined our reputation in the industry. Over the following months, David and I found ourselves applying lessons from our own family and business relationship to help a multi-generational family business navigate similar challenges. The resistance isn't really about management philosophy, I observed during one of our client debriefings. It's about respect and recognition between generations. How so? David asked. The older generation feels like collaborative management implies that their command and control approach was wrong or harmful. The younger generation feels like they can't implement necessary changes without disrespecting their parents' legacy. Sound familiar? Very familiar. The question is how to help them find a path that honors the past while enabling the future. Our approach with Morrison Industries combined organizational development methodologies with family business coaching techniques. We conducted separate sessions with different generations of leadership, facilitated conversations between family members about values and legacy, and developed implementation strategies that allowed for gradual transition rather than revolutionary change. The breakthrough moment, David told me after a particularly productive session with the Morrison family, was when Janet's father realized that collaborative management could actually strengthen the values he'd built the company on, rather than replacing them. What values? Taking care of employees, maintaining quality, and building something that lasts. He'd assumed that those values required hierarchical control, but Janet was able to show him that collaborative approaches could achieve the same goals more effectively. How did she convince him? By demonstrating that collaborative management isn't about eliminating leadership, it's about distributing leadership in ways that make everyone more effective. The Morrison project took 2 years to complete, but the results exceeded everyone's expectations. Employee satisfaction increased by 47%, productivity improved by 32%, and customer retention reached the highest levels in the company's history. More importantly for our business, the Morrison success story attracted attention from other family businesses facing similar challenges. Within 6 months of completing the Morrison engagement, we had inquiries from 12 different multi-generational companies seeking help with organizational transformation. We've accidentally created a niche market, I observed during one of our quarterly business reviews. Accidentally? I didn't set out to specialize in family business consulting. It emerged from our own experience and the lessons we learned from working together. Maybe that's why it's so effective. We're not applying theoretical frameworks, we're sharing practical insights from our own transformation. Do you think our personal experience gives us credibility with clients that traditional consultants might not have? Absolutely. When we tell family business leaders that siblings can learn to respect each other's contributions and work together successfully, they can see the evidence in our own relationship. And when we explain how family dynamics can either support or undermine business objectives, we're speaking from experience rather than just professional training. Our reputation for family business consulting led to speaking engagements at industry conferences, articles in business publications, and eventually an offer to write a book about family business transformation. A book? David asked when our literary agent first presented the proposal. About what exactly? About how family relationships can evolve to support business success rather than hindering it, I replied. About the difference between family favoritism and family collaboration. Are we qualified to write a book about family business? We're qualified to write about our experience. Whether that translates to broader insights about family business dynamics is for readers to decide. The writing process took 18 months and required us to examine our own relationship evolution more deeply than we'd ever done before. We interviewed other family business leaders, researched academic literature on family dynamics and organizational behavior, and analyzed patterns from our consulting projects. The most interesting discovery, David said as we worked on the final chapters, is how many family businesses struggle with the same issues we struggled with, comparing achievements, competing for recognition, and allowing childhood dynamics to influence adult relationships. But also how many families have found ways to transform those dynamics into collaborative advantages. What do you think makes the difference between families that learn to work together and families that remain stuck in competitive patterns? Willingness to prioritize relationship over being right, and the recognition that everyone's success can be enhanced by everyone else's success. Those sound like the same lessons that make any organization more collaborative. Maybe family businesses aren't fundamentally different from other organizations. Maybe they just make the interpersonal dynamics more visible and immediate. The book, titled Beyond Favoritism: Building Collaborative Family Businesses, was published 2 years after we started writing it. The response was both gratifying and overwhelming. We received speaking requests from around the world, consulting inquiries from dozens of family businesses, and interview requests from business media. "I never expected this level of attention," David said after a particularly intensive week of interviews and conference presentations. "Are you comfortable with it?" "It's different from anything I've done before. When I worked in financial services, success was measured by individual achievement and competitive advantage. Now success is measured by helping other people solve problems and build better relationships. Which approach do you prefer?" "This one, definitely. Individual achievement gets boring after a while. Helping other people succeed is infinitely more interesting. Even when it means sharing credit and recognition? Especially then. Some of our best consulting outcomes happen when clients implement changes so successfully that they don't need us anymore. That's not a very profitable business model. It's a very sustainable business model. Clients who succeed become references for future clients. And they often come back for new challenges as their organizations evolve." The success of our book and our family business consulting practice created opportunities we hadn't anticipated. We were invited to serve on advisory boards, participate in research projects, and contribute to policy discussions about family business succession and organizational development. "This is starting to feel like something bigger than a consulting practice," I observed during one of our strategic planning sessions. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're not just helping individual families and businesses anymore. We're contributing to broader understanding of how relationships affect organizational performance." "Is that a good thing or a concerning thing?" "Both, probably. Good, because we can have more impact. Concerning because it creates pressure to maintain expertise and thought leadership rather than just focusing on client service. How do we balance those priorities?" "By remembering that our credibility comes from practical results, not just theoretical insights. As long as our consulting work remains effective, the thought leadership will be grounded in real experience." The conversation was interrupted by a call from Janet Morrison, whose company had become one of our most successful case studies. "Sarah, David, I wanted to let you know about an interesting development," she said during our conference call. "What's happening?" "We've been contacted by 3 other family businesses in our industry who want to learn about our transformation process. They're asking if we'd be willing to share our experience and lessons learned." "That's wonderful. How do you feel about that?" "Excited, but also a little nervous. We're not consultants or teachers. We're just a manufacturing company that learned to work differently." "That's exactly what makes your perspective valuable," David replied. "You can speak about culture change from the client's perspective rather than the consultant's perspective." "Would you be willing to facilitate some kind of peer learning network?" Janet asked. "Not formal consulting, but family business leaders sharing experiences and insights with each other?" The request led to the creation of what we called the Collaborative Family Business Network, a group of 24 family businesses that met quarterly to discuss challenges, share solutions, and support each other's development. "This is exactly what we were hoping would emerge from our work," I told David after our first network meeting. "A community of practice where family businesses learn from each other rather than just from consultants?" "Right. Our role becomes facilitation and knowledge sharing rather than expert advice giving. Plus, it creates a laboratory for understanding what works and what doesn't work across different industries and family structures." The network meetings became some of the most rewarding aspects of our work. We watched family businesses tackle challenges ranging from succession planning to conflict resolution to innovation management, always through the lens of collaborative relationships and mutual respect. "The pattern I'm noticing," David observed after our 6th network meeting, "is that the most successful family businesses treat family relationships as a competitive advantage rather than a necessary complication." "How so?" "They leverage family trust and long-term commitment to make business decisions that purely financial organizations can't make. They can take longer-term perspectives, invest in relationships over transactions, and prioritize values over short-term profits. But they also have to manage the emotional complexity that comes with mixing family and business relationships. Right. The key seems to be conscious intentionality about how family dynamics support or interfere with business objectives. Which brings us back to the same lessons we learned. Separate personal history from professional collaboration, focus on mutual success rather than individual achievement, and build relationships based on current capabilities rather than childhood patterns. 10 years after David's first job application, our integrated consulting firm had become a recognized leader in family business transformation and organizational culture development. We'd worked with over 60 family businesses, published numerous articles and case studies, and established a training program for consultants who wanted to specialize in family business dynamics. But perhaps more significantly, our own relationship had become a model for what was possible when family members committed to building collaborative rather than competitive relationships. Do you ever think about what would have happened if I'd hired you that first time you applied? I asked David during a quiet moment at our 10th anniversary celebration. All the time. I think it would have been a disaster. Why? Because I wasn't ready to be an equal partner. I was still operating from the assumption that success meant being better than other people rather than being useful to other people. When did that change? Gradually, over several years of learning that collaboration produces better outcomes than competition. But what triggered the change? What made you willing to question assumptions you'd held your entire life? David thought about the question for several minutes. I think it was realizing that all my individual achievements felt hollow compared to the satisfaction of building something meaningful with other people. Even when building something with other people meant sharing credit and recognition? Especially then. Individual recognition is temporary and ultimately meaningless. Building something that lasts and helps other people is infinitely more satisfying. Those are pretty different values from the ones you had when you first applied here. They are. But I don't think the capacity for those values changed. I think I just learned to apply my capabilities in service of different priorities. What do you think would have happened to our relationship if we hadn't found a way to work together professionally? I think we would have remained politely distant. Family gatherings would have been cordial but superficial. We would have never really known each other as adults. And now? Now I consider you one of my closest friends and most trusted advisors. The professional collaboration gave us a framework for building genuine personal relationship. Do you think that's true for other family relationships? That professional collaboration can improve personal relationships? I think shared purpose and mutual respect can improve any relationship, whether it's professional collaboration or just family support and encouragement. What advice would you give to family members who are struggling with competitiveness or resentment? Focus on building your own capabilities and success, rather than comparing your achievements to your family members' achievements. And look for ways to support each other's goals rather than competing for the same recognition or resources. That sounds like advice we should include in the next edition of our book. Or advice we should be giving to our parents. The comment was made lightly, but it prompted a serious conversation about our ongoing relationship with our parents and how our professional success had affected family dynamics. Do you think they understand what we've built together? I asked. I think they're proud of our success, but I'm not sure they understand how collaboration made it possible. They still seem to think in terms of individual achievement rather than mutual support, which is probably why they made the choices they made when we were growing up. Should we be doing more to help them understand collaborative approaches to family relationships? Maybe. But I think the most important thing is modeling what we've learned rather than trying to teach it directly. Meaning continuing to support each other's success, including each other in family decisions, and demonstrating that family relationships can be based on mutual respect and shared goals. Even if they never fully understand or adopt collaborative approaches themselves? Especially then. We can't change their approach to relationships, but we can maintain our approach regardless of how they respond. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of our team for the anniversary celebration. Looking around the room at employees from both original companies plus the staff we'd hired for our integrated practice, I was struck by how much our professional collaboration had influenced the culture of our entire organization. You know what's remarkable about this? Jennifer, my original creative director, said as she joined our conversation. What's that? 10 years ago, you rejected David's application because his approach to work relationships didn't match our culture. Now your collaborative relationship has become the foundation for an even stronger culture. How so? David asked. Because you've demonstrated that people can change their approach to relationships when they're motivated by shared values and goals. That gives everyone else permission to grow and evolve, rather than being locked into their initial patterns. Plus, added Marcus, my head of operations, your willingness to be vulnerable about your own relationship challenges has created an environment where everyone feels safe discussing their own professional development needs. We've never thought about it that way, I replied. The impact goes beyond just modeling collaboration, observed Patricia Williams, who had been our first choice for the senior marketing manager position 10 years earlier and had since become a partner in the firm. You've created an organization where people's personal growth and professional development are integrated rather than separate. What do you mean? I mean, people don't have to leave their authentic selves at home when they come to work. They can bring their whole personalities, including their struggles and growth areas, because they know they'll be supported rather than judged. Is that unusual? Very unusual. Most organizations want people to perform competence and confidence regardless of what they're actually experiencing. Here, people can admit when they're learning or struggling because they know it's seen as growth rather than weakness. David looked around the room at the celebration happening around us. Do you think our personal relationship transformation influenced the organizational culture? Or do you think working in this kind of culture influenced our personal relationship? Both, I replied immediately. It's been a feedback loop. Learning to collaborate professionally gave us skills for improving our personal relationship. Building a better personal relationship made us more effective at professional collaboration. And both types of growth made us better at helping other families and organizations develop collaborative capabilities, David added. Which brings us back to the most important lesson, Patricia said. Personal and professional development aren't separate processes. They're different aspects of learning to build meaningful relationships and contribute to something larger than yourself. As the anniversary celebration continued into the evening, I found myself reflecting on the journey from David's initial job rejection to our current partnership. The transformation hadn't been quick or easy, but it had been profound in ways that neither of us had anticipated. David had applied for a job as someone I couldn't hire because his approach to work relationships was incompatible with our organizational culture. He'd become someone I couldn't imagine working without because his growth had enhanced not just our professional collaboration, but our entire organization's capacity for authentic relationship building and mutual support. But perhaps most importantly, our professional partnership had demonstrated something that had implications far beyond business success. That family relationships don't have to be determined by childhood patterns or parental decisions. Adult family members can choose to build new relationships based on mutual respect, shared values, and collaborative goals. Sarah, David said as the celebration was winding down, I want to thank you for something I've never thanked you for before. What's that? For being patient enough to let me figure out how to become someone worth collaborating with. David, you were always worth collaborating with. You just needed to learn how to collaborate. What's the difference? Worth collaborating with is about character and capability. Learning how to collaborate is about skills and mindset. And you believed I could develop the skills even when I didn't demonstrate the mindset? I believed you could develop the mindset once you experienced the benefits of collaborative approaches. That was a pretty big leap of faith. It was an investment in possibility rather than a judgment of current reality. Is that advice you'd give to other family members who are struggling with relationship challenges? I'd tell them to focus on each other's potential rather than each other's limitations. And to remember that people can grow and change when they're supported rather than judged. Even when the change requires questioning fundamental assumptions about competition, success, and individual achievement. Especially then. The most meaningful changes usually require questioning the assumptions that created problems in the first place. As we cleaned up from the anniversary celebration, I looked around at the physical space that housed our integrated consulting practice. The office design reflected the same collaborative principles that had guided our relationship transformation: open communication areas, flexible workspaces that could be reconfigured for different types of collaboration, and shared resources that supported everyone's success rather than creating competition for access. This space reflects who we've become as an organization, I observed to David. How so? It's designed for collaboration rather than hierarchy, for flexibility rather than fixed roles, and for shared success rather than individual achievement. Just like the relationship we built. Just like the relationships all of our employees have built with each other. Do you think our physical environment influences our culture, or does our culture influence our physical environment? Both. Environment and culture create feedback loops that reinforce each other, which means that changing either one can influence the other. Right? Physical changes can prompt behavioral changes, and behavioral changes can prompt physical changes. That's probably why so many organizational transformation efforts focus on restructuring workspaces along with restructuring reporting relationships. And why family businesses often need to change both their formal business processes and their informal family interaction patterns. The insight sparked another conversation about the interconnectedness of physical, organizational, and relational systems, a topic that would influence our consulting approach for years to come. 12 years after David's first application, our integrated consulting firm had grown to 73 employees across 5 offices. We'd expanded our services to include organizational design, leadership development, and culture change management, all grounded in collaborative principles and family systems understanding. But the growth had also created new challenges that tested our partnership in ways we hadn't anticipated. We need to talk about the San Francisco office situation, David said during one of our monthly partnership reviews. What's happening in San Francisco? The team there is struggling with some of the same issues we struggled with years ago: competition for recognition, unclear roles and responsibilities, and personality conflicts that are affecting client service. Despite all our training and culture development work, despite everything, it turns out that collaborative culture doesn't automatically transfer to new locations and new team members. What do you think is causing the problems? Partly hiring people who don't naturally fit collaborative environments, partly insufficient onboarding and culture integration, and partly the challenge of maintaining culture consistency across multiple locations. So we're facing organizational growing pains that mirror the relationship growing pains we experienced personally. Exactly. And I'm wondering if the solutions might be similar: direct communication, clear expectations, and commitment to working through problems rather than avoiding them. The San Francisco office challenges prompted us to develop more systematic approaches to culture integration and team development. We created mentorship programs that paired new employees with experienced team members, implemented regular culture check-ins that addressed relationship dynamics before they became problems, and established clear protocols for addressing conflicts when they arose. The interesting thing I observed after 6 months of intensive culture work in San Francisco is that solving these organizational challenges has made us better at helping our clients with similar issues. How so? Because we're not just sharing theoretical knowledge about culture change, we're sharing practical experience from our own ongoing culture development work. Plus, we're demonstrating that even organizations built on collaborative principles have to continuously work at maintaining and developing those principles. Culture isn't something you achieve once and then maintain automatically. It's something you have to actively nurture and develop as circumstances change. Which means that the work we've done on our own relationship isn't finished either. We'll need to keep adapting and growing as our partnership evolves. Are you concerned about that? Not concerned, but definitely aware that success creates new challenges that require new skills and approaches. Such as learning to manage success without becoming complacent, maintaining collaborative principles while growing organizational complexity, and continuing to prioritize relationship quality even when business demands create pressure for efficiency over authenticity. Those are sophisticated challenges that most business partnerships never have to address. Because most business partnerships don't last long enough or grow successful enough to face those challenges. So in some ways, these are good problems to have. They're the problems that come from building something meaningful and sustainable rather than just something profitable. The conversation prompted us to engage our own consultant, a family business advisor who specialized in helping successful partnerships navigate growth challenges and maintain collaborative relationships despite increasing complexity. The fact that you're proactively addressing these issues before they become serious problems, our consultant told us, suggests that you've internalized the principles you teach your clients. What principles? Prevention through conscious attention to relationship dynamics, investment in communication and conflict resolution skills, and commitment to growth rather than just maintenance. Are there specific areas where you think we need development? The typical challenges for successful partnerships are role clarity as organizations grow, decision-making authority when quick responses are needed, and maintaining personal connection when professional demands increase. All of which we've seen with our clients. Right, but knowing about challenges intellectually and navigating them personally are different experiences. The consulting process led us to develop formal partnership agreements that clarified decision-making authority, communication protocols, and conflict resolution procedures. But more importantly, it reinforced our commitment to treating our partnership as a living relationship that required ongoing attention and development. Do you ever wonder what our relationship would look like if we hadn't gone through all this conscious development work? David asked during one of our partnership development sessions. All the time. I think we would have remained cordial but distant, or we would have fallen into competitive patterns that damaged both our business and personal relationship. What makes you think that? Because that's what happens to most family business partnerships that don't actively work on relationship dynamics. And what makes us different? We learned early that our business success depended on our relationship success, so we invested in both simultaneously. Do you think that's replicable for other family partnerships? I think the principles are replicable, but the specific approaches have to be adapted to different personalities and circumstances. Which is probably why our consulting work focuses on helping families develop their own approaches rather than just teaching them our approach. Right. The goal is to help families learn to solve their own relationship challenges rather than depending on external experts to solve problems for them. 15 years after David's first application, our partnership had evolved into something that exceeded both of our original visions for business success. We'd built not just a profitable consulting firm, but a model for collaborative family relationships that had influenced hundreds of other families and organizations. More importantly, we demonstrated that family relationships could become sources of strength rather than complications, that professional partnerships could enhance personal relationships rather than threatening them, and that conscious attention to relationship dynamics could produce extraordinary business results. When people ask me about the secret to our success, David said during our 15th anniversary reflection, I tell them it's simple. We learn to treat each other as partners rather than competitors. And when they ask how we learned to do that, I tell them it required questioning everything we'd been taught about family relationships, business relationships, and individual success. Was it worth the effort? Are you kidding? This partnership has been the most satisfying experience of my professional life and the foundation of the best personal relationship I've ever had. Even though it required admitting that your original approach to work and relationships wasn't optimal, especially because of that, learning that there were better approaches available was liberating, not threatening. What advice would you give to family members who are considering working together but are concerned about the risks? I'd tell them that the biggest risk isn't trying and failing, it's missing the opportunity to build something extraordinary together. And what advice would you give to family members who are already working together but struggling with relationship challenges? I'd tell them that most relationship problems can be solved if both people are committed to prioritizing the relationship over being right. Those sound like the same insights that apply to any collaborative relationship. They are. Family relationships aren't fundamentally different from other relationships. They just make the dynamics more visible and immediate. As I looked around our main office, watching employees collaborate on client projects with the same kind of respectful partnership that David and I had learned to practice, I realized that our personal transformation had created ripple effects that extended far beyond our own relationship. Our employees had learned to build collaborative relationships with each other because they worked in an environment where collaboration was modeled and supported. Our clients had learned to transform their family business dynamics because they worked with consultants who understood relationship challenges from personal experience. Our industry colleagues had adopted collaborative approaches to complex family business issues because they'd seen the results those approaches could produce. We started this journey because our parents' favoritism had damaged our relationship, I observed to David as our anniversary celebration was ending. And we ended up building something that helps other families avoid similar damage. Do you think that was coincidental, or do you think personal healing naturally leads to helping others heal? I think people who've successfully navigated difficult challenges often become uniquely qualified to help others navigate similar challenges. Because they understand both the problem and the solution from personal experience? Because they understand that change is possible even when circumstances seem hopeless. Is that what we represent to our clients? Proof that change is possible? I think we represent proof that relationships can evolve when people are willing to do the work required for evolution. And that family relationships don't have to be determined by childhood patterns or parental mistakes. Most importantly, that collaborative relationships produce better outcomes than competitive relationships, even when competition seems more natural or familiar. As we turned off the lights and locked the office, I thought about the email that had started this entire journey, David's application for a senior marketing manager position at a company he didn't know I owned. If our parents had supported us equally, David might never have developed the drive and analytical skills that made him an excellent consultant. If I had hired David during his first application, we might never have developed the respectful partnership that became the foundation of our business success. If we hadn't learned to transform competitive family dynamics into collaborative professional relationships, we might never have discovered our calling to help other families do the same. The irony, I said to David as we walked to our cars, is that everything we initially saw as problems turned out to be essential elements of our success. Parental favoritism, competitive sibling dynamics, and professional rejection? Exactly. They all contributed to the experience and motivation that made our partnership possible. So you're saying we should be grateful for the difficulties? I'm saying that difficulties can become advantages when they're transformed through conscious effort and mutual support. That sounds like something we should include in our next book. What next book? The one about how personal transformation enables professional transformation, and how family healing can become the foundation for helping others heal. Do we have enough material for another book? We have 15 years of material. The question is whether we're ready to be that vulnerable about our journey. I think our clients and readers deserve to know that the people helping them with transformation have done their own transformation work. Agreed. And I think our story demonstrates that it's possible to build extraordinary partnerships even when you start from difficult circumstances. As we reached our cars, David stopped and turned back toward the office building. You know what I'm most grateful for, he said. What's that? That you saw potential in me that I didn't see in myself, and that you were patient enough to let me grow into that potential. And I'm grateful that you were willing to question everything you thought you knew about success and relationships in order to build something better. Do you think we would have found our way to this partnership if circumstances had been different? I don't know, but I'm glad we don't have to find out. We'd started as siblings, separated by favoritism and competition. We'd become partners united by shared values and mutual respect. David had applied for a job at my company as someone I couldn't hire. He'd become someone I couldn't imagine succeeding without. And our journey from rejection to partnership had created not just business success but a model for transformation that had helped countless other families discover what was possible when competition gave way to collaboration. Our parents had given everything to David, believing that was the best way to ensure his success. But in the end, the greatest gift they'd given both of us was the challenge that forced us to learn how to build something better together than either of us could have achieved alone. And that lesson had made all the difference, not just for us, but for everyone whose lives we'd been able to touch through the work we'd built together. The rejected job application had become the foundation of the most successful partnership either of us could have imagined. Sometimes the best outcomes emerge from the most unlikely beginnings. Sometimes the best outcomes emerge from the most unlikely beginnings. 20 years after David's first application, we were invited to speak at Harvard Business School about family business dynamics and sibling partnerships. As we prepared for the presentation, I found myself reflecting on how our story had evolved beyond our personal transformation to influence academic thinking about family systems and organizational behavior. Professor Martinez wants us to focus on the generational aspects of our work, David said, reviewing the speaking notes. Apparently, there's growing interest in how family business principles apply to succession planning and legacy development. That's ironic, considering we don't have succession issues yet. Don't we? We're both in our 50s now, with a business that employs over 100 people. At some point, we'll need to think about what happens to this organization when we're not actively leading it. The comment prompted a conversation we'd been avoiding for several years. Our consulting firm had become successful enough that it would outlast our active involvement, but we hadn't seriously planned for transition or succession. Do you think our employees would be interested in ownership transition? I asked. Some of them probably, but that's not the only consideration. What else should we be thinking about? Whether the collaborative principles we've built can be maintained without our direct involvement. Whether the organizational culture is strong enough to survive leadership changes, and whether we've documented our methodologies well enough that they can be replicated by others. Those are the same challenges our clients face when they're planning succession. Right. Which means we should be applying our own consulting principles to our own succession planning. The Harvard presentation became an opportunity to publicly commit to practicing what we preached about succession planning and legacy development. We announced our intention to begin a 5-year transition process that would gradually transfer ownership and leadership to selected employees while maintaining the collaborative culture and family business expertise that had made the firm successful. The most important element of any succession plan, I told the Harvard audience, is ensuring that the values and principles that created success are preserved and evolved rather than just maintained or abandoned. For family businesses, this means helping the next generation understand not just what the business does, but why it exists and how it creates value, David added. For our consulting firm, it means developing leaders who understand that client success depends on relationship quality, not just technical expertise. After the Harvard presentation, we received an unexpected call from our parents, who had been following our speaking engagements and media coverage with growing interest. "We'd like to visit your offices again," our mother said during the call. "It's been several years since we've seen your operation, and we're curious about these succession plans you've been discussing." "Of course," I replied. "But can I ask what's prompted the interest in succession planning?" "Your father and I have been talking about our own legacy, and we're wondering if there are things we should be doing differently." The visit turned out to be more significant than any of us had anticipated. Our parents spent 3 days observing our operations, meeting our employees, and participating in client meetings. But the most important conversations happened during quiet moments when they observed the day-to-day interactions between David and me. "I need to tell you both something," our father said during dinner on their second evening. "Watching you work together has made me realize how wrong we were about supporting you when you were younger." "Wrong how?" David asked. "We thought success meant individual achievement and competition. We supported David more because we thought he had clearer goals and more concrete plans. But we never considered that you might be more successful working together than either of you could be working separately." "What made you realize that?" I asked. "Seeing how your collaboration has created something neither of you could have built alone," our mother replied. "And understanding that our favoritism probably made it harder for you to develop the collaborative relationship that became the foundation of your success." "Do you think we would have found our way to partnership if you had supported us equally?" David wondered. "Maybe, maybe not," our father said. "But you definitely would have started from a better foundation." "Is that something you regret?" I asked. "We regret not understanding that family relationships could be sources of strength rather than just obligations," our mother replied. "And we regret not modeling collaborative approaches to problem-solving and decision-making." The conversation continued into the evening, covering topics we'd never discussed as a family: the role of favoritism in sibling relationships, the difference between supporting individual achievement and supporting family collaboration, and the long-term impact of parental choices on adult family dynamics. "Can I ask you something?" David said to our parents. "Do you think it's possible for you to develop more collaborative approaches to family relationships, even at this stage of life?" "What would that look like?" our father asked. treating your children as equals rather than having favorites, supporting everyone's success rather than just individual achievements, and making family decisions through discussion and consensus rather than just parental authority. We'd like to try, our mother said, but we're not sure we know how to change patterns we've maintained for decades. The same way we learn to change our patterns, I replied. Through conscious attention to relationship dynamics, willingness to admit mistakes, and commitment to growth rather than just maintenance. The visit concluded with our parents enrolling in our family business workshop series, not as business owners but as family members who wanted to learn collaborative approaches to family relationships. This is unprecedented, David observed after they left, our parents asking us to teach them about family relationships. It's also exactly what we've learned about change. It's possible at any age when people are motivated by genuine desire for growth. Do you think they'll be able to implement collaborative approaches consistently? I think they'll try, and I think the effort itself will improve our family dynamics, even if the implementation isn't perfect. 6 months later, our parents surprised us with an announcement during our annual family gathering. We've decided to establish a family foundation focused on supporting collaborative family relationships and family business development, our father announced. A foundation? David asked. Specifically, funding for family business consulting services for families who can't afford professional help, scholarships for family business education programs, and research on collaborative family dynamics. That's incredible, I said. What prompted this decision? Participating in your workshops helped us understand that our experience, both our mistakes and our learning, could be valuable for other families, our mother explained. Plus, we want to contribute to the work you've been doing rather than just being proud of it from a distance, our father added. The Family Foundation became operational 2 years later, providing funding for family business consulting services in underserved communities and supporting research on collaborative family dynamics at 3 universities. It's remarkable how this has come full circle, David observed during one of our foundation board meetings. Our parents' original favoritism created the motivation for our transformation, and now their transformed understanding is supporting other families' transformation. What's most remarkable is that they're actively contributing to solutions rather than just avoiding problems. Do you think our transformation influenced their transformation, or do you think they were always capable of this kind of growth? Both, probably. People often have more capacity for growth than they realize, but they need models and support to develop that capacity. Which suggests that modeling collaborative relationships isn't just good for business, it's good for everyone who observes those relationships, including the next generation. The comment about the next generation prompted us to think more seriously about the broader impact of our work on family systems and organizational culture. Several of our employees had children who were growing up observing collaborative work environments, and we were curious about whether that exposure would influence their approach to relationships and teamwork. We should be studying this, I suggested to David, the long-term impact of collaborative work environments on the next generation. As a research project? As a way to understand whether the culture changes we've helped create in family businesses actually influence the relationship patterns of future generations. The research project, conducted in partnership with 2 universities and funded by our Family Foundation, followed the children of family business clients over a 5-year period to assess whether exposure to collaborative family business dynamics influenced their own approach to relationships and teamwork. The preliminary findings are fascinating, Dr. Rebecca Santos, the lead researcher, reported during our project review meeting. Children from families that have implemented collaborative business practices show significantly higher levels of cooperative behavior, conflict resolution skills, and mutual support compared to control groups. What specific behaviors are you observing? David asked. Better communication skills, more effective problem-solving approaches, and stronger capacity for building trusting relationships with peers and adults. Are these effects observable in school settings as well as family settings? Yes. Teachers report that these children are more likely to help classmates, more effective at group projects, and better at resolving conflicts without adult intervention. So collaborative family business practices are influencing child development in ways that extend beyond family relationships? That's what the data suggests. Collaborative family dynamics appear to teach children that relationships can be sources of mutual support, rather than just competition for resources or attention. The research findings reinforced our conviction that family business transformation work had implications beyond just business success. It was contributing to the development of more collaborative and emotionally intelligent future generations. This gives our work a different kind of meaning, I told David after reviewing the complete research report. How so? We're not just helping current families work together more effectively, we're helping to develop the relationship skills of future generations, which could influence how those future generations approach everything from marriage to parenting to organizational leadership, and maybe even broader social issues like community development and conflict resolution. The conversation was interrupted by a call from Janet Morrison, whose family manufacturing company had been one of our earliest and most successful client transformations. "Sarah, David, I wanted to let you know about something exciting," she said during our conference call. "What's happening?" "My daughter Rebecca has decided to join the company after finishing her MBA. But more importantly, she's proposing to implement some innovations that build on the collaborative culture we developed with your help." "What kind of innovations?" "Employee ownership structures, community partnership programs, and environmental sustainability initiatives that involve the entire workforce in decision-making." "That sounds like she's taking collaborative principles even further than we did." "Exactly. She grew up watching the transformation we went through, and she's been thinking about how to apply those principles to challenges we haven't tackled yet." "Such as?" "Climate change adaptation, social equity in manufacturing, and what she calls, quote, regenerative business practices." She wants to create a business model that doesn't just avoid harm, but actively heals communities and environments. After we ended the call, David and I sat quietly in my office, thinking about Rebecca and dozens of other young leaders who were taking collaborative principles into arenas we'd never imagined. "You know what's remarkable?" David said finally. "Rebecca never had to learn collaboration through failure and rejection like we did. She learned it by watching it work. Which means the next generation gets to start where we ended up." I thought about the journey from David's rejected job application to this moment, 35 years of transformation that had rippled far beyond our own relationship. "David, do you realize what we actually built?" "What do you mean?" "You applied for a job I couldn't give you because your approach wasn't compatible with collaboration. Now there's an entire generation of leaders applying collaborative principles to climate change, social justice, and regenerative business." David smiled. "So rejecting my job application was the best hiring decision you ever made?" "Sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's limitations until they're ready to discover their possibilities. And sometimes rejection is just information, not judgment." As David prepared to leave, I remained at my desk, thinking about that first email 35 years ago. My parents had given everything to David because they believed individual success mattered most. But their favoritism had accidentally created the motivation for us to discover something far more valuable: that the most meaningful work happens when people build something together that's better than what any of them could achieve alone. David had applied for a job at my company as someone I couldn't hire. He'd become someone whose partnership had influenced hundreds of families and developed collaborative leaders working on humanity's greatest challenges. 35 years later, David still didn't work for my company. We'd built something infinitely better instead. The end.